This is class 172 on the Golden Doves. This class will also be really touching upon Sephardic iyun of the Talmudic text based upon my father's long footnote. We're going to be reading page 186. And I strongly recommend that you have a copy of the Gemara in front of you. It's going to be in Masechet Sukkot, Daf Kaf Het Amud Bet. I think going one line to the top of the next Amud, Kaf Het Amud Aleph. I printed out this time in this version of the class. Some of you may have seen a previous version. I printed out the correct Girsah. I want to read to you the standard text of the Talmud. Then I'm going to make a comment. The standard text is as it appears in the Vilna edition. And just so you become a little more sensitive to the problems in studying Gemara, when you're now aware, at least aware, that there's different Girsa'ot, and then I want to make a comment about that as well. So let's see, Talmud, Masechet Sukkot. My father refers to it as Sukkot, although in the standard editions it says Sukkah. So I'm going to use my father's Sukkot, right? Again, page 186 on the top of the page in the Golden Doves. So I'm going to begin by reading the Talmudic text as it appears in the Vilna Shas. It's as follows. Okay, so first of all, let's just start by saying that we have the Mishnah, Kaf Het Amud Bet, and the Mishnah says, Kol Shivat Yamim, Adam Ose Sukkato Keva Ubeto Arai. That's the basic the premise of the entire discussion, that during the 7 days of Sukkot, the Sukkah becomes the Keva. Becomes the Keva in the sense of the permanent residence, whereas the house becomes sort of a secondary residence, right? Now the Gemara starts with the Tanur Rabbanan. I'm going to read the Tanur Rabbanan. Tanur Rabbanan Kol Shivat Yamim Adam Ose Sukkato Keva Ubeto Arai. Basically, the Mishnah. Kesal, many of the Baraitot, these Tanur Rabbanan, like the Tosefta, they come to interpret or elaborate upon the Mishnah. And I'm going to skip, but then the last two words of the Beraita, umshanen basukah, those two words, umshanen, a person has to make shinun in the sukkah. What does shinun mean? It says, Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam. That could be Torah shebichtav, umshanen basukah. Could be apparently Torah shebe'al peh, Meshanen, Shoneh, like Shoneh Mishnayot, right? But that's what it says. Just Meshanen Basukah. It doesn't elaborate. It doesn't say, doesn't distinguish between different categories of text or of learning. Just Meshanen Basukah. That's what the Baraita says. The Baraita says. So Meshanen Basukah. So we have the question the Gemara asked now. So we have this. Okay, so we have the Mishnah. We understand the Mishnah. We have the Baraita, which is Umshanen Basukah, and then the Gemara asks the question: Ini veha amarava mikna umitna bimtalelta v'tanuye ba mimetalelta. So the statement of Rabbah now distinguishes between one category of Talmud Torah, Mikra Umitna, which should be done in the Sukkah, and another category of Talmud Torah, the Tanuyeh, which should be done or may be done outside the Sukkah. And this is problematic because the Baraita didn't distinguish, right? It just says Mshanin Basukkah. So that was a question. The question itself is a little problematic. It says Mikra umitna bimtalelta v'tanuye ba mimetalelta. What is the difference between Mikra mitna and tanuya. It is a little difficult. I mean, tanuya isn't tanuya a type of mitna. Tanuya, it's the same verb, right? So tanuya, outside, mitna, inside. I just wanted to become sensitive to some of the problems we deal with when we try to study Gemara, because my father used to be a master at being sensitive to problems in the Girsah and to recreating the correct text of the Talmud based on the ancient Girsah, because what we have today, of course, is the Vilna Shas. And unfortunately, the Vilna Shas is based upon texts of the Gemara that were amended very heavily. And it's not a secret. Professor Tashema, a friend of my father, who himself is an outstanding Talmid Chacham, and my father introduced me to him. He also introduced me to his article on the matter. And Professor Tashema documents how in Ashkenaz and in Tzarfat, it was common to amend texts of rabbinic literature in order to have these texts better aligned with the thinking of the rabbis or the rabbinic authorities in these communities. So, I'm not expressing my opinion on this, although I think you probably know what it is. But it doesn't matter. Meaning, I'm describing, let's call it empirical facts. I'm describing what took place. It's not a secret that this took place. It's important to be aware of this. I'll give you an example. People love quoting halachot gedolot. Halachot gedolot, there's a rabbi in Israel, I don't want to mention his name. He quotes halachot gedolot, and he says the Gaonim say this, and he says, halachot says this, and halachot lived in the days of the Gaonim, therefore he must be a Gaon, which of course is just incorrect. Not everybody who lived, Bishimon Kayara was a great Talmid Chacham, we don't want to disrespect him, but he wasn't the Gaon, not because we don't respect him, but because the Gaonim, when we refer to the Gaonim, we refer to the Rashi Yeshivot in those days, and it's a title, right? So we say Gaon Surah, you were the Gaon in Yeshivat Surah, right? Rabbi Shimon Kayara was not a Gaon, right, in that sense. So you say, the Gaonim say this, and therefore we must listen. But Rabbi Shimon Kayara was not one of the Gaonim. He lived in the days of the Gaonim. If I had lived in the days of the Greek philosophers and I said something, it doesn't make me a Greek philosopher, right? Maybe it does, but many would argue that just living in the days of the philosophers does not make you a philosopher. So living in the days of the Gaonim, Rabbi Shimon Kayara, of course, outstanding Talmid Chacham, we give tremendous respect to Talmidei Chachamim. Of course, that goes without saying. But so quoting the Rabbi Shimon Kayara, quoting Baal Halachot Gedolot, why am I saying all this? We say, you quote Baal Halachot Gedolot, you go to Eichler, you get Baal Halachot Gedolot. The Baal Halachot Gedolot today they did a hatchet job on it. I mean, it was amended in a horrible ways, right? There are some similarities between the Baal Halachot Gedolot we have today and the original Baal Halachot Gedolot. But to just quote Baal Halachot Gedolot, because you got a book from Eichler's and it says Baal Halachot Gedolot, doesn't have any validity. Certainly not among people who understand the matter, right? So halachically, when you quote, let's say, a particular book, you need to know, that may have been redacted, and many of these books were redacted. That's why one of the great things that, let's say, Professor Lieberman did, alav shalom, Tosef Takif Shuta, he did a really masterpiece of a job at identifying the correct text, and there's critical additions. Well, many of the professors in the Jewish Theological Seminary, in the days of my father, many of these professors, including Professor Lieberman, were religious, or I don't like the word orthodox. Orthodox, we're not Christians, Orthodox Christians. Shomrei Torah and Mitzvot. That's what we are. They were Shomrei Torah and Mitzvot. So they did outstanding work in studying the Geniza fragments and other sources in order to present us with, let's say, the Sifra, critical editions of the Sifra, the Sifrei, the Midrash Rabbah. So my father understood this well, and when he would teach Gemara, he would read the Nosach of the Gemara, the Girsah of the Gemara, trying to understand whether there's any discrepancies, and identifying those discrepancies, of course, he would look at the original himself. In this case, it really doesn't make sense. Clearly, there's something wrong. And if you look at the Vatican manuscript, I hope nobody gets offended that I mentioned the word Vatican. Get a cup of water or something. I was not giving a class in Israel to English speakers, and I used the word the Lord of Israel, and people got very offended because the Lord, of course, can only be one Lord. Yemach Shemo, the bastard, Yemach Shemo v'zichro. Like, I kid you not. It's just unbelievable the way people's minds work. Anyway, this is the Vatican fragment. It has Ve'ha'amar Rava Mikra u'Mishnah b'mtalelta. Wow, that's Mikra u'Mishnah, explicit there. Now you understand it. Tanuyet Talmud ban mi mitalelta. It's just so beautiful. When you have the right kids, Mikra, Torah shebichtav, u'Mishnah, the Mishnayot, b'mtalelta. Tanuyet Talmud, but when you're studying the Talmud, ban mi mitalelta. Right? Isn't that beautiful? When you have the correct Girsah, it's all clear. Right? And now you understand the question, of course. The question is very simple. The Baraita said the last two words, umshanin pasukah, and it didn't create any exception. So apparently any Talmud Torah has to be done in the Sukkah. But the Rava says no, Mikra Mishnah, that has to be done in the Sukkah. But Tanuyet Talmud outside the Sukkah. Right? So I'm going to read now the Gemara one more time using the Girsah, the Girsah of the Vatican manuscript. And here goes, Tanu Rabbanan, Kol Shivat Tanu Rabbanan, Kol Shivat Yamim, Ose Adam, Sukkato Keva, Ubeto Arai, Hakesad, Hayolo Kilim Naim Ma'al. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the last two words. It doesn't say Umshanin Basukah, it says Veshone Basukah. Okay, Veshone, meaning the recitation, Veshone Basukah, must be done in the Sukkah. So it's a different, you see the different Girsah. So all the Baraita says is Veshone Basukah. And then we have the question, because Rava says Mikra u'Mishnah is in the Sukkah, but Tanuyet Talmud is not in the Sukkah. So Veshone Basukah means you're reciting, you're saying, you're reading. So if you're reading the Talmud, why would it be done outside the Sukkah? If the Baraita says Veshone Basukah, that would include Talmud, Veshone Talmud Basukah. And he says Tanuyeh Talmud, Tanuyeh Talmud, the Shoneh of the Talmud is outside the Sukkah. So now you see perfectly how it works. Lakashya ha lemigras ha le'ayune. When did Rava say, I'm sorry, when did the Baraita say, Veshone Basukah Migras? One is for Girsah, the other is for Iyun. Okay, I don't want to explain it actually, I'm retracting my explanation because there's different explanations of the distinguish. So there's one case is Migras. Migras means you're reciting, right? Like as a person's reciting something by heart. Hale ayuneh. And then there's another type of studying where you're making iyun. In order to answer the question, the Gemara is distinguishing between two types of studying. There's girsa, migras, and there's iyun. Okay? Which is which? Is it girsa in the sukkah? Is it iyun in the sukkah? Right? But I didn't answer that question. And then I'm going to read to you the standard text again, not to torture you, but just to show you. If people study Gemara today, Mechila, I'm not against Daf Yomi. It's better to study Daf Yomi than doing other wasteful activities. So, not against Daf Yomi, but people, they when you just rush through the Gemara, you don't develop a sensitivity for the text of the Gemara. You're not even aware of the problems. I just want to read to you the standard text. Ki ha de Rabba bar Hama, ki havu kaimehem mikame de Rav Hista. How does that make any sense? as Rabba bar Hama when they were in front of Rav Chisda. I mean, there's a grammatical error in the text. Obviously, this is incorrect. Again, Kihad Rabba bar Hama, as Rabba bar Hama, Kihavu Kaimeh Mikamed Rav Chisda, when they were in the presence, I know today in the progressive community they say maybe he had several personalities. Sometimes, I don't think that's what the Gemara meant, right? Right. So what does it mean? When they were in the presence of Rav Chisda, in the presence of Rav Chisda, that means under the tutelage of, right? So they would be studying with him, and they would be under his authority, so to speak. Merahate bigmara. Together they would be Merahate bigmara. Who's together? So again, if you're progressive, maybe you understand the Sugya, because the person can have several spirits within him and several identities, and right. But for those of you who are not progressive, I also don't want to excuse you from reading the text of the Gemara. So how do you explain this? And then together they would be making you. Who is they? Right. And the correct answer says, Kihade Rabba, Verane bar Hiya, two people. Rabba, who was a Talmid of Rav Chisda, Verane bar Hiya. I don't have evidence for this. I think this is probably, and we have to check the Gemara, the Girsaot, and I have to check the Kitvei Yad. I would say that this is Rava Verame bar Hama. Why would I say it's Rava and Rame bar Hama? Because Rava and Rame bar Hama, they were known Talmidim of Rav Chisda. Give me just one moment, right? They were known Talmidim of Rav Chisda. And hold on, maybe I can find it. Yeah. And there's a story that's brought with both of them, Rava and Rame bar Hama. So I expect this is Rava and Rame bar Hama, not Rava and Rame bar Hiya. Probably the yod of the mem. You have like the two top parts of the mem. So it's Rame bar Hama. Anybody who knows would understand this, and this is almost bevadaut. My reading is correct, because Rav Chisda had two star Talmidim, and this is a story in Baba Batra Daf Yod Bet Amud Bet, and it says the story goes as follows: that Rav Chisda was teaching Rava in Rame bar Hama, not Rame bar Hiya, right? So the story goes that Rav Chisda was holding his daughter in his lap as he was teaching her Torah. When I used to teach Torah to my Talmidim, I would also hold my babies in my lap. It's a certain type of pleasure that brings, just happiness. So he jokingly asked his daughter, tell me, which of these two young men would you like to marry? And the daughter said, both of them. So immediately Rava answered, and me afterwards. And that's what happened actually. She married Rame bar Hama, and he died, and then she ended up marrying Rava, right? So I believe this is Kihad Rava Verame bar Hama, but the rest of the mem was erased. The bottom part was erased. All you have is the two top parts that look like a yod. All right. Kihavu Kaimeh Kameh de Rav Chisda, when they were in the presence of Rav Chisda studying Torah. Beresha Merahate. It's a little erased in the manuscript. I said Merahate bigmara. At first, they would rush through the Gemara. I want to explain what that means. And then they would do a yum. So Merahate bigmara. I said, let me explain what that's about. So first of all, there was no Gemara back then, but the lesson was called the Gemer. Gemer. The Gemer means Gemara means the Gemer or the lesson. So they probably didn't have writing utensils either. So the teacher of Chisda just gave them a lesson how you got to remember it. So the first thing you do is you rush through. Okay, the first bit he did, he taught us this Mishnah. Then he brought this Beraita. Then he pointed out the contradiction. Then he brought this Hakam, this Rabbi, this Emorah. So they have to remember the whole thing. When I used to study when I study Gemara, I used to study Gemara. So, but it was common. So I would go on sometimes on long walks. My in-laws lived a while. This is going back several decades. My in-laws lived far away from where I used to pray on Shabbat, and we of course go to my in-laws for Shabbat. So it would be like a long walk. I would just do Gemara the whole way, by heart, meaning not word for word by heart, by merahate b'Gemara, which is to say, I would remember, let's say I'm studying the Sugya in, I don't know, Masechet Yevamot, Kof Kaf Aleph, Amud Aleph. So I would study the Gemara, and I would say, okay, so the Mishnah brings that if a person falls in Maim, ben sheyesh laim sof, ben she'en laim sof, ishto asura. And then the Rabbi Yosef, the Gemara brings the Baraita with the Rabbi Yosef, says, no, Maim sheyesh laim sof, ishto asura, Maim she'en laim sof, ishto muteret. And then the Gemara brings the Baraita, nafal letoch kivshan, or letoch yora shel yain, or shel shemen, ishto muteret, right? And then the story of Nehunya Chofer Shehin, right? That his daughter fell into the bowl. Right? That's already Kof Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, right? Okay. So the point is, so you see what I'm doing? I'm just trying to remember the Sugya and the Gemara, right? So I'm just trying. Maybe I didn't look at the Gemara in several years, but I'm just giving you an example of what Merahate b'Gemara is. So you want to remember the main points because you can easily forget it. So immediately after they would study the Gemara, the Gemer, meaning Rav Kista would teach them the class, they would try to recollect the class. That's Merahate b'Gemara. You see what that is? That's different than studying the Gemara Be'al Peh. So there was, like my father used to teach us Gemara, and then what we would do is we would study the Gemara Be'al Peh and recite it together Be'al Peh. This is a fantastically inspiring to participate in that was amazing. It was an amazing feeling. I just lack the words to explain it, but the text becomes almost like it becomes visible in your mind, right? When you recite it by heart with other people, right? But that's different than Merahate b'Gemara. That's why I brought it. So they're studying by heart, which is literally word for word study the Sugya by heart, and then we used to do that Leil Shabbat and recite it together by heart. That's one thing. But here's Merahate b'Gemara. There was no set text, right? Rather, there was a lesson that Rav Yisrael gave, and they try to remember the lesson. I mean, eventually it becomes a set text in the Gemara of Rav Yina and Rav Asher, right? I keep saying the Gemara, even though it's grammatically incorrect, but it should be the Gemer, right? Because Gemara already means the Gemer. So, but whatever. Okay. So let's look at the my father's footnote. Now that you got the main points here. All right. So let's see. Masechet Sukkot. Okay. Tanuyet Talmud bal mi metaleta. Mi metaleta. Not like where I read it. Okay. It is permissible to be seated outside the sukkah. This reading is centered around a Tannaitic statement that shinun, a term usually designating the recitation and or study of the oral law, must be done inside the sukkah. Veshoneh basukkah. Okay, veshoneh basukkah. I said veshoneh basukkah could be pesukim in the Torah, but my father says no. This term usually shoneh in the because you have a shinatan mevanecha, but in the context of the Gemara where you see the word shoneh, that's Torah shebe'al peh really. Okay, but nevertheless, the question still stands. The Beraita says v'shoneh basukah, right? And the Rabbah distinguishes between shoneh mikra, shoneh saying pesukim. I'll put that on the side. Shoneh the Mishnayot and shoneh the Talmud. He suggests, right? Rabbah makes this distinction in shoneh, right? So his question on the basis of Semin Barabah, distinguishing between the study of scripture and Mishnah on the one hand, that must be done inside the sukkah, and the recitation of the Talmud that belongs outside the sukkah. So if you're shoneh the Mishnayot, that would be in the sukkah according to Rabbah. Shoneh the Talmud would be out of the sukkah. But the Baraita says v'shoneh basukkah. So why should we distinguish between shoneh Mishnayot and shoneh Talmud. The answer is predicated upon a distinction between two levels of study. One that must be done inside the sukkah and the other outside. There follows, okay, so you have two levels of study. One level of study is called migras. The other level of study is called yuneh. One of these is done in the sukkah, one of these is done outside the sukkah. One of these corresponds to Mikra and Mishnah, one of these corresponds to Tanuyeh Talmud. There follows a corroboration of the thesis. The two levels apply to Talmudic studies, right? Because they brought the story of Kihad Rava v'Rameh bar Hamma Kiabu Kaimeh Kameh de Rav Chisda. Right, so that's a corroboration because here we see that they recognize two levels of study. There was Merhate Bigmara and there was Me'ayene Bisvara. So Merhate Bigmara would be somehow analogous to, well, I don't want to jump the gun. I mean, is Merhate Bigmara analogous to Mikras or is it analogous to Ayun, right? Apparently, Hadal Me'ayene Bisvara would be analogous to Ayun, right? The sense of the question is that by excluding the Talmud from the Sukkah, Rava was postulating that the statement is not categorical. Well, yes, correct. The statement in the Baraita that says Veshoneh Basukah is not categorical. There is a difference of opinion concerning the answer. Right, so now we're going to get into a little more, hopefully more clarity. The answer was La Kashya Hale Migras Hale Ayuneh. So, according to Rabbeinu Hananel, the reciting or study of either scripture or Mishnah, since they are keva, that is, they have a fixed text and are part of the regular curriculum, must be done inside the sukkah. Very interesting. So, if you're reading Seudat Keva, a meal where you sit down and you're having bread and I don't know, whatever you're having, that has to be done in the sukkah. So, keva. And if it's Seudat Arai, you're having a quick snack, you can do it outside the sukkah. Rabbeinu Hananel draws, I mean, he doesn't say that, what I just said. I'm kind of trying to give it a little more flavor. There's a text that's keva, and there's a text that's arai. The same with the seudat keva, which has to be in the sukkah, and seudat arai, which may be done outside the sukkah. There's a text that's keva, namely mikra, of course, it's keva, and mishnah, of course, it's keva. So because it's keva, it has to be done in the sukkah, right? So mikra mishnah bimtalelta, right? It's in the sukkah. But Tanuyeh Talmud ba mimetalelta. There was no Gemara back then, right? There was no text of the Gemara, of course, in the days of Rav Chisda. So it's an amorphous series of words. So they would be, again, reviewing what Rav Chisda said, not necessarily stating every word for word, but just trying to understand. He brought the Mishnah, he brought this Belaita, he brought this, he said this, right? That's Tanuyeh Talmud. There is no fixed text, and that's why it can be done. Outside the sukkah. The only exception is Tanuyeh Talmud, an expression that for him is equivalent to Merahate Bigmara. So Tanuyeh Talmud is the same as Rava and Rameh bar Hamma were Merahate Bigmara, right? To speed through the Gemara or lesson given at the academy, because there was no fixed text. Since that lesson did not have a fixed version, it could be reviewed outside the sukkah. This seems to be the position of Sa'adia Gaon, who stated categorically that they are obligated to read and study inside the sukkah. In Siddur Sa'adia Gaon, he doesn't make any distinction. Why? Why does he say, well, Tanuyeh Talmud can be outside the sukkah? Why isn't he following the distinction? Since by that time, the text of the Gemara was already fixed. There was a fixed text. The time of Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon, unlike the time of Rava, and unlike the time of Rav Chisda, but the time of Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon was alive. Of course, it was a fixed text. So according to the idea of Rabbeinu Hananel, if it's a fixed text, it has to be in the sukkah. This seems also to be the position of Rabbi Yitzhak ben Giyat, quoted by Rabbi Hayim bar Shemuel, who permits only the recitation of the text of the Gemara outside the sukkah. So Rabbi Yitzhak ben Giyat, he seems to diverge a little from Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, because he says if you're reciting the text of the Gemara that can be outside the Sukkah, it's nominally the position of Rabbeinu Hananel, right? That would be the position of Rabbeinu Hananel, but Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon kind of like added that kind of a chidush, or implied a chidush, in not excluding Gemara from the obligation of Talmud Torah and the Sukkah, because I guess, again, the idea is for Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, well, now there's a fixed text, and therefore, to follow the Gemara, we would have to include the Gemara, even though the Gemara, the Sugya excludes Tanuyeh Talmud, we would have to include Tanuyeh Talmud because today we have a fixed text. But the Rigiyat seems to diverge on that point from Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, and he seems to nominally follow Rabbeinu Hananel on Tanuyeh Talmud. According to this view, studying the Gemara at the Gersa level does not require seating, and thus it is not included in the obligation to inhabit the Sukkah, whereas the other level of study, a Yun, requires seating, and therefore falls with the obligation to inhabit the Sukkah. So, according to the Rigiyat, there is a distinction in the study of Gemara, whether you're just doing Girsa, studying it by heart, or whether you're doing a Yun. So if you're studying the Gemara by heart, just reviewing it by heart, or Rahutem Mirhat, that would be outside. Because that's like a Seudat Arai. It's not. But a Iyun, when you do a Iyun, that's like a Seudat Keva, right? Right. So you see Rigiyat, so again, Rabbeinu Hananel just distinguishes between texts which are Keva and texts which are not Keva. Mishnah Mikra, in the Mishnah, Mikra Mishnah, Beshone Basukah, Mikra u'Mishnah bimtalelta, Tanuyeh Talmud Balmi mitalelta, because there's no fixed text of the Gemara, right? But the Rigiyat was apparently making a distinction within the Talmud itself and saying that if you're doing Girsa, that's outside. If you're doing a Yun, that's inside. You know, it's like a Seudat Keva. I like to use this mashal again. I gave Seudat Keva. If you're reading the Mikra, that's always a fixed text. If you're reading the Mishnah, that was a fixed text. The Gemara, amorphous. If you're just doing Girsa, that's not Seudat Keva. That's outside the Sukkah. But if you're doing a Yun, so when you're a Yun, it's like when you're having a big meal. You want to get up every 2 minutes and go to the kitchen. You want to have the bread, the knife, the fork, the salt, the olive oil, the whatever, the hummus, the tahine, everything in front of you. So when you do a Yun, when you study Gemara, how do you study Gemara? You don't just have one book. You're going to study the Sugya, then you have other Gemara that you bring, then Tosefta, then Sifra, Sifre, I don't know, right? So you're studying, right? Shita Bekubeset, right? The edited Rabbeinu Hananel, the edited Reef, you're going to bring the unedited Reef, because the unedited Reef has Rabbeinu Nisim Cheronda, whereas the edited Reef doesn't have Rabbeinu Nisim Cheronda. So you have all these books piled up. So that's kind of the idea here of Rigiyat. So Rigiyat is a little puzzling to me, because again, on the one hand, he seems to make Pesach like Rabbeinu Hananel, the idea, but then he distinguishes in Talmud between Yun and Girsa. Okay, fine. Let's look at the Shita of the Rif and of Harambam. According to the Yishak Alfazi and Harambam, the only thing that matters is the level of study. This is the most clear in my La'aniyut Dati. We don't look at whether the text is Keva or the text is not Keva. We look at the two different levels of Talmud studying, regardless of the text. In their view, Tanuyeh Talmud is the equivalent of a Yun, not of Merahateh Gemara. He says Tanuyeh Talmud means to study the Talmud, yani Yun. So when Rava says Tanuyeh Talmud bal mimetalelta, right? That's Yun, that's intensive studying, right? And remember we distinguished between somebody that's taneh, the four things, and matneh, the four things, right? So somebody who knows the four collections of work, or knows how to recite them, and matneh, intensive studying, right? Knows how to teach them, understands the concepts, right? So Tanuyeh Talmud is like the matneh, right? So meaning that according to this theory, ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. So if I'm doing Bikur Cholim and Sukkot, I don't have to be in a sukkah to eat. So similarly here, it's osek b'mitzvah. I want to do the mitzvah iyun. I need to have my proper space. I need to have my proper accommodations, whatever. I need to have my books next to me. In the sukkah, you can't do a iyun like that, right? You can do girsa, okay, one book, one thing, I study it by heart, okay, I'm going to say it by heart in the sukkah. You understand? So again, the theory of Harambam and the Rif are, right? So in there, Tanuyeh Talmud is the equivalent of iyun, not of merahate b'gemara. Merahate is rihut, fast. That's not iyun, right? Therefore, girsa, which requires no analysis, must be inside the sukkah. So when they say, hal lakashya, hale migras, hale iyuneh, hale migras means just to recite by heart in the sukkah, not like the rigiyat, right? Hale iyuneh, the matneh sort of, as opposed to the taneh. So hale migras is like to be taneh. Hale iyuneh means to be matneh, right? I mean, conceptually. Whereas a iyun must be excluded from the duty to inhabit the sukkah, which pertains to more mundane activities, right? The object of C, of the confirmation, and the confirmation is this Talmidim, Rava and Ameh Bar Hamma, right? What is the point of that confirmation? It's to provide the semantic background for Rava's statement, because the same way Rava distinguishes between Mikra Mishnah, which is in the sukkah, and Tanuyeh Talmud, which is outside the sukkah, we see that Rava and Ameh Bar Hamma, they also distinguish between Merahate and Me'ayyeneh, right? So that distinction is corroborated, yeah? It's the same Rava, by the way. So it's Rava and Rava. Well, that's why this Girsa is so important, right? I don't forget what Girsa did they have in the standard. I think they had Rabbah. Yeah, he had the Rabbah Bar Hamma, right? But it's Rava with an aleph, so it's the same Rava. Now you see how genius the Sugya is. It's telling us that Rava, when he was young, together with his friend Ameh Bar Hamma, they made this distinction. The meaning of Tanuyeh Talmud is determined by showing that Rava and his colleague would speed through the Gemara and afterwards analyze the theory, Sevara. So for Rabbeinu Hananel, Tanuyeh Talmud is Girsa of the Gemara. That's the way Rabbeinu Hananel interpreted this. But because the Gemara was not a fixed text, it could be outside, right? For Rabbeinu Al-Fasi, Rabbi Ishaq Al-Fasi and Harambam, it is iyun. Tanuyeh Talmud is the iyun, right? According to both of them, Tanuyeh must refer to Talmudic studies. Everybody agrees Tanuyeh refers to the Gemara. The question is it Girsa, like Rautem Mirhat, or is it iyun, right? Otherwise, neither the question nor the answer nor the confirmation could make sense, right? So we saw that really everything was very consistent. Beshoneh b'sukkah, right? And the question was what the Rava said. Tanuyeh is outside. Tanuyeh Talmud is outside, right? So the answer was there's two levels of Tanuyeh Talmud. There's Migras and there's Iyun, right? And these two levels of Tanuyeh Talmud, Migras and Iyun, was analogous to, and I would say identical to the two levels of study conducted by the Rava and Ameh Bar Hamma. So it's really beautiful how you see the perfection. Halacha lema'aseh, this is the way they studied. There was Migras and there was Iyun, right? Okay. If Tanuyeh referred to some less authoritative Tanaitic collection, it would not contradict the statement which explicitly points out Mishnah, because it would be Shoneh b'sukkah, Shoneh, right? Right. So it can't be that Tanuyeh Talmud is something other than the Talmud. That's why you need the word Talmud there. Tanuyeh Talmud. In the original Girsa, the word Talmud was missing. There would be no reason to assume a less authoritative literature would require the same type of attention as the scripture and Mishnah. Right? And that was the point of Ben Hananel, that the texts are keva, and therefore they must be treated like kind of like a Sudat keva. Again, I'm just using that analogy because it's conceptually it's an interesting analogy. Only by pointing out that Abba was referring to Talmud, which has a superior status, does the question have any sense. Right? Otherwise, how would it be possible to relegate Talmudic studies to a realm outside the Sukkah? Likewise, the answer in combination with reporting is injecting the question of different levels of Talmudic sense. Okay, I think I taught this enough, and anybody who wants to now study this footnote, hopefully will be able to do so. This was a very long class in Golden Doves. I usually don't give such a long class, but we did it.